Sure, I'm Peter Whalen. I'm one of the designers on the Hearthstone team. I work on the initial design team, so we work on each of the content releases. So we work on the 135 card sets. We figure out what's going to be the vibe, what's the story for this set. We work a lot on what the mechanics are, what the individual cards are, and then we work on it for the first half of design, and then we send it on to the final design team who tweaks some of the cards, redesigns things as they need help, balances all the things, makes sure the set is fair, it's fun, it's clear, and it's a great set to ship. We also work with the art team, with the sound team, with the effects people, with the community team on communicating what all of the different pieces of the set are. So we work on what the art descriptions are that we send out to our external artists, and we work with the sound team on what is the script, what do characters say when they come into play, what kind of sound should they make, that kind of thing. On the other hand, it's infinite fuel for things that want that kind of thing. If you just have, I don't know, you got some version of hand buff and you just need like 7 or 8 minions in your hand, sometimes feral gibberish just get out of control and you end up with a ton of them in your hand. You buff a bunch of them, you can do some crazy stuff with it. But really, it's just kind of a fun card that sells the idea of you're in a dungeon and these horrible little fluffy creatures with giant teeth are going to come and kill you. And so it's that fantasy of being swarmed by little things, and there's a couple of ways to take advantage of it, but we'll kind of see how it plays out. It's not intended to be the strongest card in the set. So this is less of a card for Highlander Priest. One of the things that we try to do with our expansions is to release cards for different archetypes, to allow classes to build in different directions. So right now, Highlander Priest, as you mentioned, Razakis Priest, the Keleseth version of Razakis Priest, Big Priest, those are all very powerful decks. Dragon Priest, on the other hand, has been lagging behind a bit. And so instead of giving more cards for the very powerful decks, of course they're going to get maybe a tool or two here and there, we wanted to put some of our cards in the direction of decks that weren't as powerful within that class. We're going to release 10 cards for each of the classes, so we wanted to put things in archetypes that weren't necessarily as powerful coming in. And Dragon Priest has not been as strong right now, so they're getting 2 cards in this expansion. Dustbringer is one of them, Twilight Acolyte's another one that was just revealed as well. And so they're getting some powerful cards that are great for that archetype to allow priests to have a little bit more experimentation and try out a bunch of different things. If you're interested in trying it in your Razakis Priest, that's cool. Maybe you're going to cut some of the card draw, you're going to cut Velen maybe, play a little bit less of the combo version, and play a dragon version, and that's a meaningfully different deck. And so it's cool to see the metagame evolve in that way, and that's why we're releasing some of these cards. As soon as it breaks, you get 10 mana for this turn, but it sticks around forever. So if you get that out, maybe you coin double innervated on turn 1, and your opponent oozes it on turn 2, you got a lot of mana. That's pretty good for you. So then you'll just have 10 mana from turn 2 onwards, and so maybe you shouldn't ooze it. If your opponent plays that, don't ooze it immediately. And so if it's turn 10, and you spend all your mana, maybe you play Yasharaj, and then you break Twig of the World Tree, you can spend another 10 mana on whatever other craziness you want. So they're pretty different cards. So recruiting a beast is meaningfully different than recruit any minion. There's a much more restricted set of minions. Some of the best ones to recruit off of Gather Your Party, Lich King, Ysera, Yasharaj. Yasharaj is pretty crazy. Some of the other sort of giant taunt minions you can't get with Recruit a Beast. Recruit a Beast is much more limited. You have to play things like King Crush or Charge Devilsaur that aren't sort of on the same level as the very best minions in the game, which makes sense because Gather Your Party can recruit non-beasts too. Gather Your Party is also 2 mana cheaper, which is a pretty big deal. And so you can build a meaningfully different deck in each case. The Gather Your Party has more restrictions on it. You can't play any cheap minions or else it might hit it. You're only going to put these giant minions in your deck. Katharina has less restriction. You can get cheap minions as well. You can play cheap minions in your deck as long as they're not beasts. You just have to have your giant minions be beasts. And so they build in pretty different ways. Warriors also, as a whole, a class that's much better at playing a controlling game. They have a bunch of armor gain stuff, including in this expansion. They have a bunch of ways to remove minions, and so playing a defensive warrior deck to build up to Gather Your Party is much easier than playing a defensive hunter deck, on the face of it at least, to build up to Katharina Winterwoods. There are some cards in this expansion to help a defensive hunter deck build up towards that later game, but sort of naturally they go in different directions. So these are pretty different cards. The fact that there's 2 cards in Warriors, so you get 3 copies of them in your deck that recruit a minion, also gives you some additional consistency. You get 2 copies of Gather Your Party and 1 of Woe Cleaver, so that's really 5 recruits there. It gives you meaningfully more consistency than just having Katharina. You play Katharina, maybe you're going to play Seeping Oozling, some other way to take advantage of her Death Rattle ability, maybe play Dead or something crazy like that, and then you can take advantage of Katharina's ability a little bit more consistently, but they're meaningfully different decks, so it's very hard to compare them and say, oh, this one's much better than the other. Hard to tell. It depends on kind of how the metagame shifts. Ixlid is a very powerful card. It has a lot of innate power. There's some crazy things you can do with it. Obviously, if it sticks for a turn and you get to start your turn with full mana and Ixlid in play, it's going to be pretty good for you. If you play that as part of a Twig of the World Tree combo, maybe you play Ixlid, you break your Twig, and then you can go crazy with the, I guess you sort of have 15 mana remaining at that point. You can do some truly insane things. So Ixlid, at least, you know, his effect is incredibly, incredibly powerful. On the other hand, it's just a question of how the metagame develops. If the answer is the best Ixlid decks tend not to play charge minions and they play some defensive things, but there's a lot of board clears, then Ixlid's not going to be that great. If the metagame's incredibly aggressive and you're not playing Ixlid with taunts, then again, he's not going to be that great. So it's sort of a question of how things shape up. So I think Ixlid has potential to be a powerful card, but it's always kind of a question of how our players end up pushing the game. It's a legendary card. It's certainly powerful. Is it going to be the most powerful card in Arena? I'm not sure. I suspect not. There's some pretty good stuff out there. Lich King's pretty strong. Deathwing's pretty good. So there's no plans to ban it from Arena, but if in a couple of months we're looking at Arena and it's only Druid players and they're only doing it to draft the 1 legendary, that sounds crazy to me, but we'll certainly step in at that point. It's a Death Rattle. That's a Death Rattle effect on the minion. It's a granted Death Rattle like something like Infest from Whispers of the Old God. It gives a Death Rattle to re-equip Valinir. So if it gets silenced, it goes away. If you somehow end up with Valinir and play Dead in the same deck, you can play Dead your Valinir buffed guy and you'll just immediately equip the weapon. So one of the things we wanted to capture in this expansion is the core fantasy archetypes for each of our classes. And for rogues, that's being sneaky, that's being subtle, that's laying traps, that's hiding in the shadows and then springing an ambush on somebody unsuspecting. And so secrets are one of the ways in Hearthstone that we can really capture that. So our plan isn't to do secrets forever for rogue. It's a thing for this expansion, and then we'll reevaluate and figure out if in a few years we want to do more secrets or see where we go with that. But it's really that for this expansion, we wanted to capture that sneakiness for Rogue. Rogue has always been one of those classes that there's kind of a question of why didn't they get secrets? And the answer is because they had a lot of stuff going on in Classic, and we wanted to put secrets in classes where it would help them the most. But Rogue as a story has always made sense to have secrets. And so we have 3 secrets for Rogue, all of which are stolen from other classes, if you will. One of them is a version of a Paladin secret. It's like Getaway Kodo, except it reduces the cost by 2. And that plays pretty interestingly in Rogue. They all cost 2 mana. We've also got a version of Misdirection. Instead of attacking a random thing, when the enemy attacks your hero, they attack one of their neighbors instead. It's basically betrayal. So sometimes that's better, sometimes it's worse. It kind of depends on the situation, but it's at least a little bit more consistent than Misdirection, so it's interesting. And then we have an Ice Block variant as well. So when your hero takes damage, it becomes immune for the rest of the turn, rather than preventing lethal damage. It's very different than Ice Block. If your opponent has a lot of minions on the board and is going to do 20 damage to you this turn, this is probably better because you get to block a lot of that damage. But on the other hand, it's not fire and forget. You don't just get to put it down on turn 2 or 3 and then have it last until it triggers and you desperately needed it because you would have died otherwise. So Rogues getting secrets made a lot of sense for the expansion, and so we're pretty excited with the different secrets that they have, how they kind of interplay with each other, and what that's going to do for Rogue going forward. So Pirate Warrior is not seeing a lot of play right now, but it's never really our goal to say, okay, the metagame is going to be this. What we do more is we put out tools, and there's a bunch of powerful control tools in this expansion. Psychic Scream, Dragon's Fury, Reckless Flurry. There's a bunch of very good area of effect spells, especially things that let you come back from behind. So if you start to fall behind on board, one of the things that's best to have is to have area of effect spells, and it doesn't matter to you if you're behind, if they hit your minions as well. One of the things we found is that area of effect spells that only hit your opponent tend to cause more of a snowball. You get a little bit ahead, your opponent tries to come back, and then you play your area of effect spell and it kills all the stuff they were trying to do. So we've been trying to do more, especially in this expansion, Cataclysm is another good example, of area of effect spells that affect both players, so they serve as more of a catch-up mechanic, something that you can do if you're behind. We see that with Lone Champion as well. He's a neutral minion that if you have no other minions, which means you're behind to some extent, he's a 2/4 taunt with Divine Shield, which is great. It's a much bigger Annoyatron, basically double Annoyatron for just 1 more mana. So that's fantastic, but it only works if you're either behind or you're playing a strategy that's not that interested in having lots of minions on the board. That said, it's hard to say, oh, this is going to be a control meta. We've had a reasonably controlling meta lately. We had a reasonably controlling meta maybe a year ago when we had a lot of Reno Lock and Reno Mage. Right now we're seeing Rizaka's Priest, which is something of a controlling deck. We're seeing some amount of Dead Man's Hand Warrior, several control decks that are doing reasonably well. So we'll see what the metagame brings with Kobolds and Catacombs. It's kind of up to our players. It's hard to tell exactly, oh, this is what's going to happen. There's so many people out there that build all of these different wild and crazy decks that it's tough to tell, like, oh, this is exactly what's going to be the case. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of classes getting very powerful cards. I think priests are getting some great stuff, especially Dragon Priest is getting some good stuff. Some of the priest decks that are very, very spell-based, which are some of the builds of Big Priest, well, lots of the builds of Big Priest, some of the builds of Rizaka's Priest are getting some cool toys in things like Dragon Soul. There's a bunch of cool, interesting cards for Priest the set, but that's true for a lot of the classes too. Warlock's getting a bunch of crazy stuff. Possessed Lackey has a lot of power. Void Lord has a lot of power. There's a bunch of interesting Cataclysm is a pretty interesting card. There's some really cool stuff that's going on in Warlock as well. Some of the stuff revolving around the Spellstone as well. Hunters are getting some powerful cards. They got the Spellstone is an interesting option. They got another Secret to Power Wandering Monster, which is cool. A bunch of the classes are, basically every class is getting some cool new powerful toys to play with. And so yes, it's true, absolutely true. Priest is getting some cool toys, but so is everybody. Yeah, so that came out of working on quests. We worked on quests in Ungoro, and quests are these huge, monumental things. When you complete a quest, you get a reward that essentially wins you the game in a lot of cases. If it doesn't win you the game, it moves you very close to that. And in exchange, you have to build your whole deck around it. You have to jump through an enormous hoop in order to make your quest work. You need to play a lot of Death Rattle minions, a lot of taunt minions. You have to bounce your guy a bunch of times. There's a lot of work that goes into making your quest happen. But it wasn't obvious that quests needed to go that way. When we were working on quests to begin with, we really asked the question of, should quests be small things that you have a bunch of in your deck and you kind of go on one quest at a time, or should quests be these giant legendary things that are incredibly powerful and shape your whole deck? And for the first time we did quests, we really wanted to push them in the direction of, these are crazy cards. They're always going to start in your hand. They have monumental rewards that you're super excited about. But having done that, we asked ourselves, what if we did a smaller version of Quest? What's a smaller version of Quest that makes a lot of sense? And so that brought us to the Spellstones. They have smaller effects than the Quest do. They're generally not, you win the game, but they're much, much easier to upgrade. Gaining 3 armor is really different than playing a bunch of 5 attack minions. Overloading some mana crystals is really different than playing 10 Murlocs. And so the Spellstones are easy to upgrade, which means they don't have to start in your hand. It also means that their effects can be gradated a little bit more. So there's more of a difference between, oh, I'm going to play the lesser Spellstone, the medium Spellstone, the greater Spellstone, as opposed to my quest does nothing until I complete it. And so both of these are sort of different directions that you can take quests. And I'm pretty glad that we get to explore both of them. I think quests were really cool, that there's something really fun about this is what I'm doing. I'm going on a quest for this game. But spellstones are also really cool. They're very skill testing. Do I play the version of the spellstone I have right now? Do I wait to try and power it up in a couple of turns? How do I build my deck to best take advantage of that? How many cards do I want in my deck that hurt myself so that the Warlock spellstone is great? How much armor gain do I want to power the Druid spellstone? Am I okay with just my hero power? Is that enough? And so building those decks and playing it out over the course of the game is actually really a lot of fun. So I think spellstones are the mechanic I'm most excited about in this expansion. Yeah, definitely spellstones. Spellstones are great. They're super skill testing. They're very interesting. Don't get me wrong, I love the other mechanics. Recruit is great for deck building. It's very, very interesting. We're seeing a lot of people talk about it online right now with how exactly do I make my recruit deck work? Is it super random? Is it very consistent? And it's kind of up to you. You get to build your deck, and if you want to build a deck that only has great recruit targets, go for it. You can totally do that. And then there's very little randomness in recruit. On the other hand, you can build a deck that has minions of all costs, and your recruits are going to be on average worse. But maybe that's right so that your deck is better as a whole. I don't know the answer to that, and we'll kind of see how it plays out as the metagame evolves. So recruit's cool. Unidentified items are just fun. They're silly. They're skill testing in that you have to figure out which version did you get and how are you going to take advantage of that. But all three of them are cool cards that are fun to play. Having another buff in Priest is cool. Crazy armor gain card and Warrior and the Weapon and Paladin. They're all fun cards. So I'm pretty excited about those, and legendary weapons are cool as well. Just seeing new classes getting weapons, having these kind of crazy effects baked into weapons is a lot of fun as well. Oh man, that's tough. Rin is one of my favorite stories. Rin, the first disciple, she's totally insane. And she's the one who, when she dies, she starts you on this ritual. You complete the ritual by playing 5 spells, and then that gives you a demon that destroys your opponent's deck. That story is just fantastic. You're in the dungeon and this monster demon that comes out after a huge ritual. I feel like I've played that game before somewhere. And so I really love the story there. Marin's cool, the story breaking a treasure chest. On the gameplay side, I really like Unstable Evolution. It's a card that evolves one of your minions, so it transforms it into one that costs 1 more, but you can do it as many times as you like this turn. As many times as you have mana, not exactly however many you want. So you can keep repeating it. And it's very skill testing. There's sort of a push your luck element here. You end up with like a 6 mana 6/6 maybe, and you say, okay, am I willing to risk going up 1 more and maybe getting a 1/1? Or should I just stop here and hit one of my other cards? Should I play something else from my hand? It's very skill testing to see exactly how much you want to push your luck. So that card's a lot of fun. There's also just some like crazy cards that play into archetypes that haven't been played that much before, and I'm interested to see how people explore with them. Things like Cataclysm, which could see play in just a controlling Warlock deck, or maybe in some kind of discard deck. Linessa, who goes in more of a buffing Paladin deck. It's just interesting to see how some of those things play out. Some of the hand buff helping cards, things like Valinir or Dragol's Jailer, I'm excited to see, but I think Rin's my favorite card. It's just a cool story, and it's pretty funny to play. And I love the effects that go into it. The animations that are with it are just awesome. They really capture that incredibly powerful, crazy demon. We don't have any plans to introduce a 10th class. I think the most likely scenario is that we introduce it in something like a Tavern Brawl, or maybe in a solo adventure, or do something like we did with Death Knights, where it's something that happens for all of the classes, where all of the classes get their Death Knight form. We have 9 classes right now, and they capture the original starting classes in World of Warcraft. And one of the things that we deal with a lot is to try and figure out what's the differences between each of the classes. Make sure each class has a mechanical identity that's all its own. And I think to introduce a 10th class, we'd need to have a new mechanical identity, something that we could capture that made it feel very different than the other classes that already exist right now. We haven't really come across a mechanic yet where we said, that doesn't fit into any of the classes. We don't really want to do it there. We want to just put it in a 10th class and make something new for that. So we definitely don't have any plans right now to introduce a 10th class, and I don't think it would be that helpful for the game either. It's not something that I'm really excited to pursue at the moment. I think a 10th class is a cool idea in concept, but I don't think it would be good for Hearthstone right now.